Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, apologies from Simon Richards. He has an important appointment that he can't get out of. But it is, as you know, the duty normally to run the Zooms of the Senior Vice President. And although Simon's the President, this is his programme. He asked me to take over today and introduce Ed, which is quite serendipitous because I've spent the last 6 weeks trying to sort my first year of my program out, and last night I completed my first year. I'm getting someone to agree to do a Zoom for me, so I'm getting early practice really. Ed Kroft is our guest speaker today. Ed Kroft is a King's Counsel and a Fellow of the Royal Philatelic Society in Canada. He's a lawyer, as I said, a King's Counsel who lives in Vancouver. He's the, I believe he's the current president of the Royal Philatelic Society Canada, but I do know he's the past president of the Society of Israel Philatelists, and his great passion and collecting interest relates to the Jewish settlements of the Holy Land and the social and historical influences for their creation, which I'm sure we'll hear a lot about today. Ed has written many articles about the postal history of the Holy Land for various philatelic publications, and he successfully exhibited and judged at regional, national and international levels. In 2012, he was a winner of the Regal Award of the Society of Israel Philatelists for outstanding contributions to Holy Land philately. In 2013, he won the Geldart Medal awarded by the Philatelic Society of Canada, Royal Philatelic Society of Canada. And in 2017, he won the Jennings Award from the American Association of Philatelic Exhibitors. I know that he's recently been appointed for the Royal of Canada's International Liaison Officer and also will be chair of the jury at GAS this summer. So without any further ado, let's hand over to Ed and be well entertained, I'm sure. Ed, over to you.
Thank you very much. And I hope you now can see my material on screen. I will be speaking to you today about mail from the Holy Land through a period of time after the creation of the General Postal Union, the Universal Postal Union, ultimately named. And I will be speaking about mail from specific destinations, Asia and South America. As Mark mentioned to you, I have over 300 covers to show, and I'm happy, Simon, to be added to your program in future to help you make up a session at that particular time.
You're in for 2026-27.
That's fine. Thank you very much. Now, I will speak to you today about why it is challenging to collect this particular area, because I'm going to show you mail from 100, 150 years ago, 125 years ago, and I will be speaking about the period between 1875 and the end of World War I. Now, the postal relations that you're going to see involve the Ottoman Empire or foreign post offices of certain sovereign states, all of whom are members of the Universal Postal Union and which were located in the Holy Land. I'm going to be showing you mail from what I term uncommon destinations, and those destinations were either sovereign states themselves or possessions or territories of sovereign states, which were at some point members of the Universal Postal Union. I will not be talking about postal history prior to 1875, what I will term and others term the pre-UPU period, because that involves different analyses of rates and routes, and many of the destinations to which mail was sent from the Holy Land during that period of time clearly were uncommon. And as I like to say, the farther back you go, the more uncommon the destinations are. Now, some of you have asked me why I use the term uncommon, and I chose it carefully. I didn't want to use the words that some people mentioned: exotic, rare, scarce, unique, weird, unusual. I just tried to find a relatively objective, neutral term, uncommon, and I was looking at factors such as geography, size of population, frequency with which mail reached the Holy Land during the period under review. So during this presentation, I will be considering destinations to be in common if mail was sent to those destinations on a seldom basis throughout the relevant period or at times throughout the relevant period. Now, the mail that you're going to see may have been sent to a destination from an Ottoman post office in the Holy Land during this subject period. Turkey joined the Universal Postal Union on July 1st, 1875, and there were a variety of post offices that were Ottoman post offices in the Holy Land until 1917 or 1918, at which times the Egyptian Expeditionary Force, led by General Allenby, captured these various towns or cities in which these post offices were located, and then the EEF established post offices in these places. The listings of the various Ottoman post offices that I'm going to be speaking about are found in outstanding texts, one of which was published by the RPSL, namely the text by Aloni and Joseph Hachmi. There are other excellent texts that deal with Ottoman postal history. Turhan Turgut, a recent RDP, published the book of Postal History of the Ottoman Empire. The cities from which mail was sent, which housed Ottoman post offices, were Jerusalem, Jaffa, Haifa, Tiberias, Nazareth, Nablus, Jericho, and you will see mail in this presentation from these various places. Now, the Ottomans were not the only parties who had post offices in the Holy Land. There were foreign offices that were established by a variety of countries under capitulation treaties that had been concluded with the Ottoman Empire in the 18th century, 19th century. Austria, Russia, France, Germany, Italy all had offices in the Holy Land during the period under review, and all of these parties joined the Universal Postal Union in July of 1875, except France, which joined a year later. So you will see mail from the foreign post offices established by these organizations. And you will also see that the mail has different postage stamps from different countries, reflecting the post offices from which the mail was sent. Now, in terms of stamps and currencies reflected on stamps and the denominations, you will see that the mail, as I mentioned, is found with different postage stamps. And the stamps that were used depended on which post office the mail was sent from. And you will see on your screen, as some of you were wondering when I was going to actually show postage stamps and not just text, stamps from Austria, Germany, Russia, France, and Italy. And they have different denominations. Usually they were overprinted with the Turkish denomination, para, piaster. Sometimes you'll see other overprints. And the other overprints emanated from the decision by Austria to overprint some of its stamps with French currency, centimes and francs. These stamps were intended to only be used in Crete, but ultimately they were used in the Holy Land. And Germany in 1908 adopted French denomination surcharges on some of its stamps. So you'll see on the screen an example of the Austrian stamps, which were overprinted with the centime marking, which were used instead of, at times, the para or piaster markings that are found on other stamps. No postal history talk is complete without a discussion of postal rates, and the Ottoman Empire typically set the postal rates for the Holy Land. The rates were expressed, as I mentioned earlier, typically in the Turkish currencies, but sometimes the centimes was found on the stamps as well. For those of you who are not familiar with the postal rates, you will see the reference to para or piaster and the rates for printed matter, 10 para, postcards, 20 para, single letter rates, 1 piastre courage, or 1 piastre for registration as well. The foreign mail was not affected by the enactment of a war orphans tax during World War I, and postal rates were increased in 1916 to, in effect, compensate for the fact that the mail to foreign destinations was not subject to this additional war orphans tax. The currency equivalents that I mentioned as a result of the centime overprints make the following changes. So when we look at mail, which we'll do very shortly, you'll see that 1 piastre was the equivalent of 25 centimes, 20 para 10 centimes, 10 para 5 centimes. So we'll see mail in this presentation that is printed matter, postcards, single letters, for example. Now, for those of you who are wondering about the foreign post offices in the Holy Land, you will see that the 5 countries that I mentioned earlier established post offices in 1 or more locations. Austria, a member of the Universal Postal Union, had a variety of post offices in different locations, both in the Jewish agricultural settlements that Simon referred to in his introduction of me, and Jaffa, Jerusalem, Haifa, Bethlehem, Nazareth, for example, larger locations. France had 3 different post offices in 3 different cities. Russia, 3 different cities. Germany was a latecomer to the party, and it had post offices Jaffa, Jerusalem, and some smaller locations. Italy had 1 post office only in the Holy Land, established in Jerusalem in 1908. And for those of you who are always wondering about challenge factors and looking for things that aren't as common, finding mail from Jerusalem, from the Italian post office to uncommon destinations is a large challenge. For those of you who instead of looking at countries, want to look at different locations, I reordered the post offices so that you'll see that Jaffa had a number of post offices, and Jerusalem had 6 because it had the Italian. Jaffa had 5. Haifa had 4. Tiberias 1. Safed 1. Nazareth possibly 2, but at least 1. I say possibly 2 because there's a debate as to whether or not the Austrians had a post office in Nazareth. Again, postal history discussions also have to mention censorship and auxiliary markings. And you will see that the mail from the Holy Land, or even to the Holy Land, did not always bear censorship tape or censorship markings. At a particular point in time before World War I. It was uncommon, so to speak, but as the war began, we see the emergence of censor tape, censorship markings, and the censorship was done by the Ottomans in the Holy Land, typically in Beirut or Istanbul, Constantinople, sometimes in Jaffa, Haifa, Safed, and the smaller community of Petah Tikva, which was an agricultural community. Here on the screen is an example of a piece to what was, I call, a common destination relatively to Switzerland, and it's put up on the screen just to reflect the different types of censorship markings you would otherwise see on mail to the Holy Land, or pardon me, from the Holy Land. So on this particular postcard, you will see an Ottoman stamp or a Turkish stamp. It's an embossed stamp also on the card, and it's a postmarking from the small agricultural community of Petah Tikva with a variety of censorship markings, including one that shows the star and censorship in Beirut. Now, what is the challenge factor and why do I like to collect this area? I like finding material that relates to a particular destination that's uncommon. I challenge all of you to find mail to a particular uncommon destination emanating from all 5 foreign dispatching post offices in the different locations in the different towns and cities that I showed you earlier. I defy you even more to find 6 pieces of mail, one from an Ottoman post office and one from each of the 5 foreign dispatching post offices to a particular destination. And you will see that as I move along. In addition, a challenge factor in this area involves postal rates. You'll see printed matter, postcards, single weight letters, possibly heavier letters, double, triple weight, letters that bear registration service, parcel cards, for example. Finding them to uncommon destinations is a challenge. So I'd like you to reflect during my presentation on how many uncommon destinations you will see on different continents. Today, I'm going to speak about Asia and about South America. In future presentations, I would be speaking about Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, Tahiti, Hawaii, for example, Canada, Mexico, Central America, the West Indies, Dominican Republic, Haiti, just to tantalize you as to the types of destinations we could be looking at. But what also is notable in this presentation and generally in this area is determining what route of transportation the mail took. As I'm fond of saying, there was no internet during this period, telling young school children this when they wonder about how the mail got from one, or messages got from one person to another in the 19th and early 20th century. But we're going to be looking at mail traveling by sea, principally also by land. We don't have the use of airmail relevant to the period under review. So I'm first going to now talk about Asia, and you will see the hodgepodge on the screen. You will see the different colors. You will see the ownership, so to speak, by different countries of different areas of land in Asia. And I'm going to be speaking about a number of these destinations in my talk. I mentioned transportation routes. Typically, the mail went by sea. The mail went through the Suez Canal on the way to Asia. Different shipping lines were used in order to carry the mail. There might be mail moved from one ship to another, as the case may be. And some of the shipping lines with which a number of you may be familiar, Ropit, the Russian carrier, Austrian Lloyd is another. Mail was carried by some of these organizations to the destinations I'm going to be looking at. And I'm going to mention specifically Lloyd Austrian Co. After the opening of the Suez Canal, Lloyd established a variety of routes to the Far East, going through the Suez Canal to Ceylon, to Singapore, to Hong Kong, to China. And there are various publications that deal with the postal history and the transportation routes and carriers. An example is the text Austrian Post Offices Abroad, Part 3, which deals with the Austrian navigation companies. Here's an example on the screen of just one of the ships of Lloyd, for example, that might have been carrying the mail in the circumstances. And on the screen, we see a map in 1909 of the routes that the ships took to the various destinations about which I will be speaking. So we're going to move to different destinations. First, I'll speak about Burma, a British territory in 1886. And one of the points I want to get across to people is we typically have mail going from one UPU member to another. So in this case, we've got mail going from the Holy Land. We've got Turkey as a member of the UPU. It's going to a British territory, Britain being a member of the UPU, England at that time. So this is a map of Burma. And here is a piece going from the Austrian post office in Jerusalem at this point in time in 1910. And you'll see the postmark on the stamp. It's a 5 centime stamp, reflecting that it is printed matter in the circumstances. And what's nice to see is you will see an arrival postmark at this point in time. So it's a piece going to a soldier in Burma, and it's marked England, India, as the case may be. Now we move on to China, and we see an uncommon destination, which is China, and a series of cities, including Shanghai. China is very interesting because it did not join the Universal Postal Union until 1914. The China Imperial Post was the governing body in 1897 dealing with the mail, but we also had foreign post offices that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with in China, both before and after 1897. So in terms of postal rates, you're not always dealing with formal UPU postal rates at a particular point in time. Here's the first piece I wanted to show you from the Ottoman Post from Jerusalem in 1900 or 1899, and it is a 1 piastre letter rate. You see the postmark to Jerusalem. It's going to Shanghai, various Chinese markings, auxiliary markings on the mail, and arrival post office in Shanghai. Here is a piece from the amazing collection of Itamar Karpovsky. It is one of 2 recorded AR letters from Haifa. It's 3 piastre, not just 1, not just 2. So you've got 3 piastre transiting Port Said, which is the Suez Canal effectively, transiting Hong Kong, arrival in Shanghai. So various nice markings, and the letter was unclaimed and therefore returned to Shanghai. Next, we see a piece going to Peking, now Beijing, to the American Board Mission, Austrian Post. So when I talk about the challenge factors, you saw the Ottoman Post to begin with out of Haifa. Now you see the Austrian Post out of Jerusalem. Various transit markings through the Suez Canal, Hong Kong, Shanghai, arriving in Peking on May the 10th. And when we look at the different transit periods over which mail is traveling, usually what you're seeing is 4 to 6 weeks for mail to travel. And in this particular case, you have the Jerusalem postmark canceling the Austrian postage. Next, Jaffa under the Austrian Post. First, we saw Jerusalem. Now we see Jaffa, 1907, again reflecting challenge factors. And the challenge factors being different cities, different post offices to a particular uncommon destination. This is a nice piece because it is the 20 para postcard rate. It's showing a cancellation of the Lloyd Shipping Organization, transiting different places through the Suez Canal, Alexandria, Suez, transiting Hong Kong, and arrival postmark on a postcard in Fuzhou on June the 11th. So you're looking at roughly a 5 to 6 week period once again. Next, you see German Post. So we saw Ottoman, we saw Austrian, now we see German Post out of Jerusalem, 1905 and 1909. Beautiful markings on these postcards. You'll see in one case, you've got a 10 para printed matter rate, and then you've got on a postcard a 20 para postcard rate. Why is that the case? Because the printed matter rate was available when there were less than 5 words written on the postcard. And you see that on the left as opposed to the right. Where on the other side of the postcard, you will see, well, you won't see it, but I will tell you that there are more than a minimum number of words. Both postcards show transit markings, one through the Suez Canal on the right side, through Port Said, Colombo, Ceylon, Shanghai, arrival in both cases in different cities in China. So what you saw from me in terms of China was Ottoman post office, Austrian post office, German post office. You didn't see an Italian post office. You didn't see a Russian post office. I'm looking for them because that's the challenge factor. Now we move on to India, and here is British India, which some of you may collect in the circumstances. And here's the first piece out of the Austrian post, out of Jericho, 1913 to India. Postcard rate 20 para. It's going to Bombay, transiting Port Said, transiting Aden after it comes out of the Red Sea, out of the Suez, through having been through the Suez Canal. Here is the Jericho postmark on the postcard, and it transited from Jericho, which was Ariha, which was the Ottoman name for Jericho, and transiting over to Jerusalem. You'll see it's a number of weeks for the card to get there, usually 3 to 4 weeks to India by sea. Here's a piece out of my friend Michael Bass's collection, a wonderful piece coming out of the small Jewish agricultural settlement of Rishon LeZion, going to Calcutta, where the Carmel Wine Organization was looking to establish business. This Mr. Adelovich, a representative of the company, was trying to market wine from the Holy Land in India. And what's notable about this, they couldn't find him, so the piece was ultimately redirected to Singapore. But you have beautiful transit markings on here and an arrival postmark in Singapore as well. You also see that the card has been canceled and with a Jaffa postmark because mail from the small agricultural communities was brought to larger cities for posting. Next is a wonderful piece from Jaffa through the Austrian post to India. And some of you may think that a dog may have walked in the mud and trampled upon this particular cover. But this is an amazing cover going to Dr. Vladimir Hafkind, who cured cholera. And his name surfaced during the COVID epidemic or pandemic because people were comparing his work with cholera to the emergence of COVID more recently. And the cover is quite amazing because it was registered in Jaffa and it's got 3 piastre of postage, which means it's double weight registered, but it travels to all sorts of cities looking for Dr. Hafkind, who originally was doing his work in India and ultimately was returned to Jaffa after a lengthy journey. You see the inconnu auxiliary etiquette, but these are the kinds of pieces that are really hard to find in this area. It's an uncommon destination, India, plus it's heavy weight, plus it's registered and going to quite a notable personality. Next, Austrian post out of Jerusalem to India, going to Calcutta, 10 centime postcard rate, and it's traveling roughly for 3 weeks by sea in this particular case, and it's 10 centimes postcard rate, not 20 para, but this is an example of the alternative currency that I mentioned before. So we've looked at, in India, we looked at Austrian post, we looked at Austrian post, Ottoman post, and now we've got German post. And this is a registered letter out of Jerusalem through the German post. It's registered single weight, even though there are 3 stamps. When you add them up, it's 2 piastre. And it's going to Bombay, ultimately redirected to Delhi, to a sea post office marking that's reflected on the cover. And it's roughly a relatively quick journey, given perhaps the registration in the circumstances. Now we have French post. I didn't show you French post to China. Here is French post to India out of Jerusalem. And this is a 10 centime postage franking. and it's the postcard rate. You see more than 5 words on the left side of the divided postcard. It's going through Port Said, transiting the Suez Canal, going to Damtari, and it's relatively 3 weeks for the journey to conclude. You have the Jerusalem postmarks on the postcard. We move from China, we move from India to Japan, which became a UPU member in June of 1877. And here is a piece from the Ottoman post in Jerusalem. And a lot of mail from the Holy Land is dated December 24, 25, 26, around Christmas time. This is from Bethlehem, a postcard going to Tokyo, Japan, transiting the Suez Canal, Port Said, Ceylon, Colombo, Singapore, the markings on the back of the postcard, and it arrives in Tokyo with Japanese markings on the back of the card. This is the piece that was shown on the introductory slide. It's Bethlehem, Ottoman Post, 1909, Christmas Eve, going through the Suez Canal, various other locations, transiting Kobe, Japan, transiting and arriving in Osaka in Japan, reflected by the markings and cancellations that are on the postcard. It is 20 para postcard rate. This is a piece from the collection of Itamar Karpovsky, an extraordinary piece, 30 soldi triple rate Austrian post out of Jerusalem, 1877, early UPU piece to Japan. It's going to Yedo, which was, some of you may know, is the former name of Tokyo, with various transit markings on the back, Suez Canal, Alexandria, Yokohama, so Hong Kong. Wonderful, wonderful piece. Next, we have Haifa through the Austrian Post, 20 para postcard rate, arrival in Tokyo, various transiting, Suez Canal, Ceylon, Singapore, Hong Kong, and it takes a period of time, 6 weeks, for this particular item to get there. Next, we have the Philippine Islands, and here's a depiction of the Philippines for your benefit. We have the Ottoman Post in Jerusalem going to the Philippines, April 1912, 20 para postcard rate, arriving in Manila a number of weeks later. And it's always wonderful to read these postcards in addition to looking at their interesting transit postmarks or markings, because you'll see that the person says he had smallpox on board. And so it's interesting to read about that as you're looking at the other postal history, including the 20 para postcard. Here's another piece that you saw in the introduction. This is going to the Philippines, and it's out of the Austrian Post in Jerusalem, but it's also franked with a Turkish stamp as well, which has not been canceled by the Austrian Post. This is the postcard rate. It arrives August the 20th after a roughly 4-week journey transiting Singapore, and it's redirected once it gets to the Philippines. But these kinds of pieces of postal history are interesting because it reflects some ambiguity on the part of the sender as to which stamps might have been applied. But this also could have been a postcard which had a stamp previously applied to it when it was purchased, but ultimately the Austrian stamp was affixed and canceled. Another interesting piece going to the Philippines, to Manila, registered 2 piastra piece, wonderful, out of Jerusalem, going to through various places, including Singapore, the Suez Canal, as I mentioned. An interesting piece of consular mail going to the Philippines. You have the ephemera that's affixed to the back, the seal of the American consulate from Jerusalem in Palestine, which is notable in and of itself. It's 1 piastra single weight letter transiting Suez Canal, Penang, Singapore, and on arrival in the Philippines, to the governor of the province, this particular province in the Philippines. French post, so we've seen Austrian, Ottoman, and we've seen French now. Jerusalem to Manila, postcard rate 10 centime postcard. German post. So now I've shown you 4 different post offices to the Philippines out of the Holy Land, and 20 para postcard rate. We've got 2 German stamps making up the 20 para. Arrival in Manila after 4 weeks, transiting Penang and Singapore. Moving away from that destination, we saw 4 post offices to the Philippines. We didn't see 6. Now it's Siam. First piece to Siam, which was a member of the UPU in July of 1885, is Ottoman Post, Jaffa, Jerusalem transit postmark through the railway. So that's interesting in and of itself on the postcard. Arrival in Bangkok, transiting the Suez Canal. Siam, Austrian Post, Haifa, Bangkok, arrival September the 9th, 10 centime, 20 para postcard rate, and very nice transit markings on the piece as well. Now we have Russian post. So as this is the first time I've shown you a Russian post, this is out of Haifa, which Russian post out of Haifa was not that common. We have the 20 para postcard rate, but this says it's 32. It's got a roped cancel out of Haifa in Cyrillic, and the arrival postmark in Bangkok. Moving on to the Strait Settlements, Singapore. And for those of you not familiar with the Strait Settlements, they're in dark shading on the peninsula that also reflects the Federated Malay States, which I will show you in a moment. Piece to Singapore, Austrian post out of Haifa, 20 para postcard rate, arrival marking in Singapore. Austrian post out of Jerusalem, 1899, takes a number of weeks to get there, goes through the Suez Canal, through Penang, and other places. An amazing piece out of the Alexander collection in Tel Aviv. Mr. Alexander was an extraordinary collector of Palestine postal history, and this is out of the wine organization that I mentioned before, out of the Jewish agricultural settlement of Rishon LeZion, franked in Haifa, 2 piastre letter rate, arrives in Singapore because the wine company was looking to establish markets in Singapore and had an office there to sell wine out of the Holy Land. When they couldn't find Mr. Adelovich, they returned the letter to Jaffa. Another piece to Mr. Adelovich. First, it was Austrian post. Now it's German post going to Singapore and out of Jaffa, 20 para postcard rate, arrival marking in Singapore. And it also had transited the Suez Canal in order to get to Singapore. Russian post to Singapore out of Jerusalem, 1902, rather than 1912 on my slide. And you see the Cyrillic postmarkings, postmarks that reflect Jerusalem, and it is the 8 para rate in that circumstance. Now we move on to Federated Malay States, and here's a piece to the destination. It was British territory through the German post out of Haifa, and it's going through Suez Canal once again, Singapore, and arrival in Ipoh, Perak. And very uncommon to see mail from the Holy Land to the Federated Malay States. But here's another one out of Itamar Karpovsky's collection. It's a mixture of centimes and para on the stamps. So you see 25 centimes on one stamp, 20 para on the other 2 stamps, respectively, and making up 40, making up the 2 piastre single weight letter registration rate. And it transits through various places, but leaves Jaffa to begin with from the German post. So Federated Malay States, all you're seeing here is German post. And how many of you have mail from the Holy Land to Sumatra. And here's a piece, 5 centimes, printed matter to Sumatra. And it's going to a place up in the north on Sumatra called Sigli, which was where the Dutch government in northern Sumatra was located. I've moved out of Asia into the Middle East. Here is a piece to Persia from Jerusalem, Russian post. It's transiting Odessa. Here is the Cyrillic reflecting the transiting in Odessa and ultimately arriving in Tehran, the 10 para postcard rate. Now, quickly, I'll move to South America. I've taken you through Asia. I've shown you that I haven't produced 6 different post offices. I've produced 4. I've gotten to 2 or 3 in some circumstances, but it's hard to get to 6. Transportation to South America, well, instead of going through the Suez Canal, we're going through the Mediterranean, across the Atlantic Ocean. Sometimes when you get to South America, there might be a land route that's employed in order to get to mail to where it's going. Here's mail to Argentina, Austrian post out of Jerusalem, 1902. Different markings on arrival, but this is 10 para postcard printed matter rate because there's less than 5 words in content on the postcard. But how long is it taking? Oh, it's taking a long time to get to this place, roughly 5 or 6 weeks. Next, we have German post to Argentina, and this is registered letter to Piastra out of Jaffa, and this is taking almost 8 weeks to get to its destination, even though it's going by registered mail. Russian post to Argentina out of Jaffa, 1906. Appropriate postage has been applied to this letter in the circumstances. It is registered. You see the recommande there on the cover. You see the shipping agency seal on the back of the cover, and the arrival, notwithstanding registration, into Argentina is taking about 6 weeks. French post to Argentina out of Jerusalem, 1 piastre letter rate, and it transits Paris on the way to Argentina. Remember, it's going through the Mediterranean. It goes all the way up to Paris and then goes and carries on its journey to Buenos Aires. Bolivia, Austrian post out of Jerusalem. The only piece I've seen to Bolivia is Austrian post to Cochabamba, and there's the shipping markings of the French Maritime Transportation Company. British Guiana out of the Holy Land, Austrian post to the British colony, British Guiana, American Consular Service. Sella Merrill was a person who received a lot of mail from the Holy Land from Georgetown. This is 1 piastre letter rate with arrival in Georgetown. Next, we have Ottoman post to Brazil, and this is the 20 para postcard rate, taking roughly 8 weeks to get from the Holy Land to Bahia in Brazil. Next, Ottoman post out of Haifa, 10 para printed matter rate because of the absence of writing on the postcard. That's why you only see 10 para printed matter. Austrian post. So we saw Ottoman post to Brazil, now Austrian post to Brazil to Sao Paulo, arrival postmark on the postcard, which was sent from Jerusalem in 1902. You're looking at roughly 4 weeks for this postcard to arrive. German post out of Jaffa to Brazil. And what's so interesting, it initially was addressed to Paris. It was rerouted to Petropolis to Brazil, and you're looking at about a month, even with the various transit markings showing the journey that this postcard took, 20 para postcard rate. Now we finally have an Italian post, and it's going to Brazil of all places. 20 para postcard rate. Some of you will say, oh, Ed, throw this piece away because it's got a stamp that's not fully formed. It's been ripped a bit. But how many pieces do you see from the Holy Land to Brazil through the Italian post? Very, very, very few. It's the only one I've ever seen. Ottoman post to Chile, which was a UPU member in April of 1881, arriving in Santiago. You have single weight letter, and it transit not just by sea, but also by land once it gets to the coast, because it goes through the land corridor linking Chile and Argentina, and the ship had landed at Buenos Aires. Austrian post to Chile out of Jerusalem, 20 para postcard rate going to Valparaiso through the Straits of Magellan, ultimately taking weeks and weeks to get there, but here's the arrival postmark in Valparaiso. Russian post to Chile, wonderful to see this, various transit markings, a rope at cancel in Russian, indicating that it was being sent 73 days to get to its journey from Jerusalem to Chile, to Valparaiso. How many paces do you see from the Holy Land to Suriname? Paramaribo, roughly 5 weeks, an arrival postmark in Paramaribo with a 10 centimes postcard rate properly franked. Next, an unusual piece to Paraguay from the Holy Land. Jerusalem, 1911, 10 centimes postcard rate, arrival postmark, and Asuncion. Now we get to Uruguay, the site of the upcoming exhibition. We get to Uruguay from Nazareth. It's going to Montevideo with arrival in Montevideo in Uruguay. 36 days to get to its destination. And finally, I'll end with the place where the FIP exhibition will be, Punta del Este, in a couple of weeks. December the 25th, leaves on Christmas Day, printed matter, 10 para, and arrival in Punta del Este. And that, my friends, is my presentation for today. Thank you very much.
Just to say, we have one question for you, Ed, that is in the chat, which I'd like to ask you now. Came from Keith Burton. When you were explaining about rates increase. Keith says, when the rates increased in 1916, did the extra money go to the War Orphans Fund, or was it to cover war cost increases?
I don't know, Keith, the answer to that question, other than to suggest that the money went into the Ottoman treasury. And therefore, I don't know if it went to the fund for which the stamps were not issued. So I can't tell you about the proceeds. I do not know.
Okay. Peter Mora, just noticed that a couple of your South American items actually had a different destination than the one shown.
I'd have to go back and look at that.
Yeah, okay.
I didn't think so because, and it may have been, I may have made an error on the slide, but I would be grateful for any ones that were noticed. So thank you, Pete.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, for being so eagle-eyed.
Well done in the time that it took to for me to get through it too.
Certainly, when I looked at the slides with you the other week, last week, I don't remember observing any errors in it, but that just means I might have overlooked them as well.
I will say, Mark, and to the group generally, Simon, this is an area where there's so much amazing postal history. And it's not just from the Holy Land to the places I showed, but going abroad to other destinations. Finding this mail has taken me many, many years. And I hope it will take me many more.
Yeah. Anyway, Simon, that was the final question or comment that's in the chat. So perhaps back to you.
Well, thank you, Ed. I think the best way to describe it was a gallop through the postal history. Every time I thought I'd see a piece and I could ask an erudite question on that particular piece, it moved on, and I had to stop myself. What an absolutely amazing presentation.
That's kind.
Close to my heart because I have an unusual destination, and I love collecting weird stuff. I use the word weird countries, weird rates, etc. And I absolutely loved it. The thing that's really struck me, though, was the quality of the cancels.
Mm-hmm.
Every single cancel. And I know you haven't gone, oh, I'm not going to keep this piece because it hasn't got a great cancel. It just so happens that, even some of the less pristine covers still had great cancels on. And it just goes to show that the postmasters in those days took great pride in what they did.
Well said. Well said. Because I was struck by how many transit markings were on a postcard.
Yeah, space for
it. To the point where sometimes you can't read what was written.
Yeah.
Even on the other side of postcards, for example. But I'm glad you mentioned that, Simon, because it's an area where you collect these unusual destinations to see the postal history unfold before your eyes, where you can follow the mail as it's on the ship, so to speak. It's great.
It's very interesting. We think it was a long time, 73 days to get from the Holy Land to Paraguay or something, which is a long time. But we're back to those sort of levels now throughout the world. I mean, I was in Colombia in January and posted a postcard to my grandchildren, which they got yesterday. It's taken 4 weeks to get from Vietnam and Cambodia to the UK, which is ridiculous.
But Simon, then your grandchildren will say to you, "Well, grandfather, why didn't you just email us? It would have taken 0.73 seconds to get."
I'm the lat list. They get a postcard.
I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that's the typical retort.
Yeah, I know. But look, that's the end of the formal part of the meeting. But I'm sure Mark has a screenshot of a certificate. Do you,
I
Mark?
have indeed got a an electronic copy of the certificate of appreciation, because, be very clear on this, Ed, we really do appreciate you putting this play together.
But yeah, I'd like to thank you on behalf of Simon, myself, and all members of the Royal for such a great presentation, Ed. And you can rest assured that I will be coming to you for part 2, if I may.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you very much indeed. And there is your certificate signed by
Thank you.
Simon, and that will be posted to you in due course.
Excellent. I wonder if it'll take 73 days to get.
Who knows? By then, Mr. Trump might have put a naval blockade on Canada. You might not get mail coming in.
Well, we just had a postal strike in Canada, and I can tell you it looked like it took 73 days for some of the philatelic items that I ordered to get to me.
But no, well done indeed. It was superb.
Thank you so much.
I absolutely loved it. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for having me. Honored to be here. And thank you, everyone, for staying and watching the presentation. It's much appreciated.